We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Vavam and Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 76b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing Rabba's opinion within Rabbi Shimon. Rabba says that when Rabbi Shimon says in our Mishnah, Mevi'in Kodshim Lebeis Apsul, and what that means is, let's say, for example, you have a mixture of animals, you have Asham and you have Shlamim, so Rabbi Shimon says there's no problem treating them all like the Asham, treating them like the stricter of them, even though you're restricting the amount of time for the animal that was a Shlamim. It could possibly bring it to disqualification now. If it becomes noser, you're not giving yourself enough time to eat it, etc. But still, Mevi'in Kodshim Lebeis Apsul, that's what Rabbi Shimon said. And Rabba said that Rabbi Shimon only says that b'di'evet, after the fact, when already the animals got mixed together. So then he says we can be lenient. Otherwise, you cannot be so lenient. And the Gemara now is in the middle of asking from a brisa that's discussing mitzora. The case over here is you have a situation where you don't really know if the person is a confirmed mitzora or not. So what he does is, the brisa says, when he brings the animal as a carbon, he makes a stipulation. He says v'im lav, and if not, as the brisa continues, he says asham zeh shel shalmei nedava. Then he says it's going to be a shalmei nedava. It'll be a donation of a shlamim. It'll be one or the other, depending on whether or not the person is a mitzora or not. V'yoso asham, and the brisa now continues and explains this particular asham ton shchita b'tzafon umatan bahonos usmicha unesachem utnufas chazav v'shok v'nechol liyom v'layla. This particular animal, so it's going to be slaughtered in the north. You're going to do the bahonos, that's the application to the thumbs. You're going to do the smicha, the leaning on the animal. You'll do the libations. You'll do the waving of the chazav v'shok. It's eaten for a day and a night. And as Rashi explained at the end of the previous summit, again, you're going to treat it with all the stringencies of shlamim and all the stringencies of asham. And over here, you seem to have an example, even lechatchila, that we say mevi'in kodshim lebeis apsul. As Rashi here continues and explains, v'hacha, but over here, dilma lav mitzorahu, maybe he's not a mitzora, v'have shlamim, and it's actually a shlamim, v'katani v'nechol liyom v'layla, and yet it says that it's only being eaten for a day and a night. We're restricting the amount of time. Alma lechatchila nami shari Rabbi Shimon. You see that Rabbi Shimon even lechatchila says mevi'in kodshim lebeis apsul. That's the question of the Gemara. This brisa was according to Rabbi Shimon, as the brisa said in the beginning on the previous summit. It was Rabbi Shimon speaking, and so the Gemara now continues and answers tikune gavra shani. Here it's different because we need to solve this the problem for this individual. He needs to go through his purification process, and therefore in this situation Rabbi Shimon would allow it. The Gemara says, well, hateinach asham, all of that works when it comes to the asham with regards to the animal, but lo g'ma'ikol amemar, this solution is good for the animal. The brisa is presenting a solution, but what do you do as far as the log shaman? What are we going to do to solve that? Rashi explains, hateinach asham milsei de Rabbi Shimon kamafarish v'yazal. This over here, we're now not talking about Rabba anymore. We're just trying to explain what exactly is Rabbi Shimon's solution. V'lav l'rava kamosiv. This is not really a question anymore on Rabba. Again, this is just to explain Rabbi Shimon, and so the Gemara says again, what are we going to say by the log ma'ikol ameimar? And the Gemara says for that the Yamar, he can say log zeh yehei l'nedava, yehei nedava. This log will be a nedava, it'll be a donation, as Rashi explains. Log zeh yehei nedava im eino mitzora. If he's not a mitzora, you can say that. Da'amrinu l'kamon b'perakol atadar misnadvin shemen bifnei atzma. We're going to say later on that one can donate oil on its own, and so that will be the solution for the log. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'dilma lav mitzora, maybe this individual is not a mitzora, uvoi mikmatz, and then there's a requirement of kmitza, of taking a fistful. Rashi explains, uvoi mikmatz hamisnadev shemen, if someone donates oil, so the way that works is, kom, so he takes a fistful of it, umaktir hakometz, and then he burns that fistful, v'shirav necholin, and then the remainder is eaten, kediyolef lei, mi korban mincha, you learn that from korban mincha, melamed shemisnadvin shemen ke mincha, that teaches that the donation of oil is the same as a carbon mincha, and so there's a concept of kamitza. And so if that's the case over here, that it's an adava, so isn't there going to be a requirement of a kometz? And the Gemara says the mikmetz, that in fact he does take the kamitza just in case. Again, this log over here, it may be used, it's possible it's being used for the purification of the mitzora, but it's possible it's a donation, so he will take the kamitza and burn the kamitza. But the Gemara says if that's true, v'dilma mitzorahu, but maybe he's a mitzora, uvoi matan sheva, and then there has to be an application, 7 applications, it's the sprinkling of the oil. Rashi says, Matan Sheva k'dichsiv kra belog shel mitzora. This is a pasuk by the log of oil of the mitzora. It says, V'hiza min hashemin betzbo. It says that he sprinkles with his finger from the oil, and so then you're going to need the Matan Sheva, if it really is for the mitzora. And the Gemara says to that, the Yoiv, okay, so he will do that. He will, in fact, do those sprinklings. But the Gemara says, how is that possible? But isn't some of it now missing? Rashi explains, V'chasrle, al yedei kamitza, meaning if he's doing the kamitza on the assumption that he might not be a mitzora, so then v'log chaser, it ends up being, it's a log that's missing, it's not a full log. And pasul, the rule is that it's disqualified. You can't do the Matan Sheva if it's missing. K'dichsiv v'log shaman, because the pasuk says it has to be a log of oil. So over here, he's bringing this oil, he's taking a fistful of it and burning it on the mizbeach in case the individual is not a mitzora. But then he's going to go ahead and try to do these 7 sprinklings, but you can't do that if it's missing something. And the Gemara says to that, it's not a problem. Demaisi porsa umalile, he can bring a little bit of oil and he can fill it. In other words, he can replace that which was taken. That's why that is not a problem. Titanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, the Mishnah says, chaser halug, let's say the lug is missing something, ad shelo yotzak, before he pours, yimalenu, then he's able to fill it up, he can replace. Rashi explains, ad shelo yotzak min halog al kapo, this is talking about before he pours from the log shemen al kapo hasamolis, on his left palm, k'dichsivu min hashemen yitzok hakohen al kaf hakohen hasmolis, that's what it says in the pasuk, v'hiza hakohen betzbo hayimonis min hashemen asher al kapo hasmolis, he pours it again to the left, and then he uses the finger of his right hand, and he does these sprinklings. And so what he does is, according to the Mishnah, he just replaces the oil that's missing, so that's not a problem as well. Again, what essentially is going to happen is he'll take the kamitza of the oil, and that will take care of a scenario where the individual is not a mitzora, and then he'll replace whatever he took, and then he'll be able to do the sprinklings. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'haboy haktara, but doesn't that kometz, doesn't it need to be burned? And Rashi says, V'haboy kometz haktara the dilman adavahu. Again, maybe it's an adava, so shouldn't the kometz have to be burned? And the Gemara says to that's not an issue. The iktar le, so he'll burn it. And Rashi says, the maktar le v'shirayim nechol and mimanavshach, he can burn the kometz, and the remainder will be eaten either way. Either mitzorahu, if the individual is a mitzora, harehu nechol, so it's eaten. Kedamin in Perek Beis Shammai, like we say earlier in Perek Beis Shammai, l'chol karbonim l'rabos log shemen shal mitzora, l'chol karbonim includes the log shemen of mitzora, so it can be eaten for that reason. V'in adavahu, and let's say it's an adava, so harehu kishiore mincha, that's like the remainder of a karban mincha, and it can also be eaten, so that's not a problem, so he'll be able to burn it, and he'll be able to eat the remainder. And so the Gemara again says, so he does do the burning. But the Gemara says, Emas, but when exactly is he going to burn this kamitza? Is he going to burn this fistful of oil? Ibasar matanos sheva. If he's going to do that after the 7 applications, the sprinklings of the oil, so then haveluhu shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara. What you then have is a situation where the remainder, you're now missing some oil from the remainder between taking the fistful and doing the burning. And there's a rule over there, ve'in maktirnes hakometz, and you're not allowed to burn the kometz in such a situation when you have shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara. Rashi explains, ibasar matanos sheva, if we're talking that he's going to burn it after the 7 sprinklings, the 7 applications, so dilma nedavahu, so then maybe it really isn't a dava, maybe this has nothing to do with mitzora. V'chiyoiv matan sheva, and if he's going to now do these 7 matanos, basar kamitza after taking the fistful, havalu shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara, so now the remainder is now missing some oil between the kamitza and the haktara. The kaimelon b'menachos b'perakamen, the halach is in the first parak of menachos, ein maktir hakometz alein. In such a case, you don't burn the kometz. Techsib min hamincha prat l'shechasri, because that's what it says. It's written min hamincha, and we learned that from the pasuk, and so therefore that would not be possible. And now ikodem matanos sheva. Now let's say he'll say fine. So what we'll do is he'll burn the kometz before he does the 7 matanos, and then he'll do the 7 matanos. But that's also a problem because kol shemimenu leishim hareu beval taktiro. There's a different halacha that once it's put on the fire, there's a halacha bal taktiro. Bal taktiro would actually prevent you from doing the matnos sheva. Rashi explains v'kodem matan sheva hechi motzi lemesav sumine matan sheva. If you're going to do the burning before the matan sheva, you won't be able to do the matan sheva because dilma nedavahi. Because the problem would be as follows: maybe it really isn't a dava, maybe it really is just a donation. V'haktara as hakometz haktara, and maybe the haktara of the kometz is a real haktara. V'hana chavalu shirayim, and then everything else becomes a remainder. V'chihadar ma'ayil midi minayu ka'avar mishum bal taktiru. And now if you're going to go ahead and do these sprinklings, that would be a violation of bal taktiru. Kedechsiv, as it's written, kichol seor v'chol devash v'hay mimenu yiseruhu. There's a word mimenu that's extra here. V'darshinan beinami lo saktiru kol shemimenu isha la'Hashem yesh bichlal hazeh kodshim u'shori mincha v'lechem aponim shekarev man kavar le'ishim ho'imurim. In all of these cases, kodshim shori mincha lechem aponim, if something was already put on the fire, they already put ho'imurim v'chein hakometz v'chein habazichin, whatever goes on the fire, whether it's the sacrificial portions or the kometz or the bazichin. The rule is kaimi shirayim b'val taktiru, that the remainder now has a prohibition of bal taktiru. V'hanoch hazos, and these sprinklings b'mokum haktara kaimi, that actually is in the place of burning. It's similar to burning, and so you'd have a problem of bal taktiru over here in this situation. Again, if this burning of the kometz is a real burning, you then have a prohibition of bal taktiru on the remainder. And the Gemara answers to that. Amar Rav Yehuda bereid Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Rav Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, says there's a solution, because if this really was a nedava, the sprinklings aren't really for mitzora. So what he simply says is demasik lehu l'shem meitzim, that he burns it, so to speak, as if it's just wood. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says l'reach nichoach iatamali. You can't burn it if it's for the purpose of reach nichoach, for the purpose of an offering. Avolatamala, but if it's just for the purpose of burning wood, and Rashi explains l'shem meitzim, just for the purpose of burning wood. The Amar Hachi, essentially over here he says as follows: Im mitzorahu, if this individual is a mitzora, de'ein haktaras hakometz haktar, in which case the burning of the fistful wasn't even really a burning, to halav nedava havoy, because it wasn't even a nedava. Harei mazem me'elu, so then he's allowed to sprinkle from these. She'ein on shirayim, because it's no longer in the category of shirayim of remainder. Vim eino mitzora, now if the individual is not a mitzora, v'haktaras hakometz haktar, in which case the burning of the kometz is a haktara, and you do have this problem about taktiru. V'yesh mimenu li'ishim v'yelu shirayim himu v'val taktiru. Now you've put some on the fire, and the remainder is included in bal taktiru. So you simply say hare hazo sa'elu, these sprinklings ki'ilu heimayim. It's just like it's water. It's nothing. I'm not really doing anything. Sharei rashoy lahalo shir mincha lemizbeach. He's allowed to put the shirei mincha on the mizbeach. And the Shinuyei Nuschos adds al hamizbeach l'shem eitzim. Again, you can do it on the mizbeach if it's just l'shem eitzim, just to burn it, not as an offering. That would be fine, and that would be the case over here if he does it as if it's just a sprinkling, not as any kind of offering, so to speak. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph.